So in today's lesson, we are going to be looking at estimating sums and differences of mixed numbers by using benchmark numbers. So this skill is going to be very similar to what we did when we estimated sums and differences of fractions. The big difference is instead of using values that are less than 1, we're going to be using values that are going to be in some cases larger than 1. So the first problem that I'm going to look at is on page 401, and it says Alex has 5 cups of strawberries. He wants to use 1 3/4 cups to make fruit salad, and he wants to use 3 1/2 cups to make jam. Does he have enough strawberries for both recipes? So we need to see whether or not this, when we add this up, is going to be less than 5 1/2. So the first thing that we're going to take a look at is, in this case, we're going to round to benchmark numbers. And the benchmark numbers that we used our last time is we used 0, 1/2, and 1. And we're still going to want to use 0, 1/2, and 1. Those are going to be our benchmark values that we're going to want to use. It's just going to look a little bit different when we have larger values. So if I take a look at 1 3/4, a 1 3/4, when I look at the fraction, 3/4, I need to decide whether it's going to be closer to 1/2 or closer to 1. So if I draw out my number line and look at that, so I have 1 1/2 here. I have 2 here. I need to see where 1 3/4 is going to go. And 1 3/4 is actually going to be in the exact middle. So I can either round down to 1 1/2 or I can round up to 2. In this case, it would be smarter to round up because I want to make sure that I have enough. So I want to overestimate. I don't want to underestimate in this problem. I want to create an overestimation. So 1 3/4 cups, I'm going to round. Remember, those squiggly lines mean approximately. I'm going to round that up to 2. And then I'm going to look at 3 1/2 cups and see what I need to round that to. Well, what's nice about 3 1/2, 3 1/2 is already a benchmark number. I already have that benchmark fraction of 1/2. So I'm going to leave that at 3 1/2. Now, when I'm adding these, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to add my fractions first. So I don't have a fraction here. I just have a whole number. So it's just going to be 1/2. And then I'm just going to add my whole number. So 2 added to 3 is equal to 5. So he needs 5 1/2 cups to make both the fruit salad and the strawberry jam. So he does not have enough strawberries. He is short about 1/2 a cup of strawberries. Okay. So that would be how we estimate. So again, we're looking to get to that halfway point. We're really looking at, can I do that 1/2 is a good value to get to, especially to make it easy for that estimation. We're just looking to see if the answers are going to be reasonable. All right, so we're going to move into the next problem on page 402. And it says, Jamila's mom wants to make a size 10 dress and jacket. About how many yards of fabric does she need? So if she's doing both, so she's doing 2 1/4 for the dress, and then the jacket she would need 1 5/8. We need to see how much she would need. And so what we're going to look at is we're going to see what these round to. So again, I'm looking for that benchmark number. So the benchmark numbers that I would use for 2 1/4 is I would either use 2, 2 1/2, or 3. So if we think about it in terms of fractions, right, this was our 0. If we were looking just at fractions, this was our 1/2, and this was our 1. So the 2 would mean that I would round down. The 3 would mean that I would round up. So that's how I kind of think about it in terms of benchmark numbers, is I'm still using the 0, 1/2, and 1, but the 0 means I'm rounding down, and the 1 would be that I'm rounding up. So 2 1/4, if I take a look and if I need to build that number line, I build that number line. So here's 2, here's 2 1/2, here's going to be 3. Figure out where 2 1/4 is. 2 1/4 is actually going to be, again, smack dab in the middle. And so your judgment call on what you want to do, whether you round it down to 2 or round it up to 2 1/2. So this would be a good one to what you want to overestimate on this one, because I want to make sure that I have enough fabric and I don't run short. So I would actually round 2 1/2 or 2 1/4 up to 2 1/2. I know the book says, if you're following along, that it would round down to 2 1/4. but I like to have that overestimate. 5/8. And so when I build 1 and 5/8 and see where it goes, I'm going to go ahead and build my number line. So this is going to be 1, 1.5. And again, you don't need to build a number line. If you guys don't need that visual, don't use that visual. But if that visual helps you, build that number line. And so I look at where 1 and 5/8 is going to be. And so when I look at my half, I'm going to go to blue so you can see when I look at my 1/2, maybe I'm going to go to blue, 1/2, 4/8, that's equal to 4/8. So 5/8 actually is going to be like right in here. So it's really close to 1 and 1/2. So I'm going to round this to 1 and 1/2. And so when I add those together, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add my fractions together. And when I add my fractions together, I get 2 over 2. Okay. So when I have 2 over 2, 2 over 2 is going to be equal to 1. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 1. I'm going to go over it in blue. Take that 1 and I'm going to add it to the 2 and the 1. And when I add those all together, so 2 plus 1 plus 1, I end up with 4. So my answer is going to be equal or around 4. So they're going to do about 4 yards is what they're going to do. Okay. So it still ended up being the same estimation because I left 1 and 5/8. I rounded that one down. If I wanted to be a little bit safer and make sure that I overestimated, I actually could have done 1 and 5/8 is going to be equivalent to 2. So then I have that overestimation. And then I said that 2 and 1/4 was equal to 2.5. And I would have ended up with 4.5 yards. And by doing that overestimation, I would have made sure that I had enough fabric. All right. So here we go. If we take a look at your guided practice number 1, it says to estimate with mixed numbers, when should you round to the next greater whole number? So when do I round up to the next greater whole number? I want to do that. So you're going to round when the fraction part. So when we talk about the fraction part, that's the 1/2, the 3/4, the 5/8, the 6/9. So when the fraction part is greater than a whole, or sorry, then greater than 1/2, we round up. So on that last problem with I had 1 and 5/8, I would probably go ahead, if I'm going to do this rule, I'm just going to go ahead and round it up. Just round it up to 2. Again, when we estimate, we want to make these problems as simple as we can. So the more I can get to whole numbers, the easier it's going to be to estimate, and the faster I'm going to be able to get through it. Okay, so when do we estimate? So I'm on question number 2. When do we estimate a sum or difference? So when we look at, we look for that keyword about. So about how much, or the other thing is, or when we don't need an exact answer. Okay, if we take a look at our next problem on 3/4. So it says we're going to round to the nearest whole number. So 3/4 is going to round to 1. 1 and 5/7. So we have to look and see is 5/7 greater than a half or less than a half. And if you remember, we just take this and we divide it by 2. And so a half was 3.5. This is much larger. It's only 2 places away from 7. So I'm going to round that to 2. And then 2 and 3/10, I'm going to round that down to 2 because 5/10 is my halfway point. Okay, now we're going to actually take the rounding and we're going to apply it to adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So the first one that I have is I have 2 and 5/9, and I'm going to subtract 1 and 1/3. And I always want to show that estimation. So you're always modeling your mathematical thinking so people can see what you're doing. All right, so 2 and 5/9. 5 is going to be closer to a whole, so I'm going to round that up to 3. And then 1 and 1/3, I'm going to round that down to 1. And so 3 subtract 1, I'm going to get an answer of 2. And then I have 2 and 4/10, and I'm going to add that to 3 and 5/8. And so when I add those together, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do my estimation. So 2 and 4/10, That is going to be close to 2.5. And then 3 and 5/8, I'm going to go ahead and round that one up to 4. Or you could leave it at 3.5. And then 2.5 plus 3.5 would be 6. So let me do this one. So if I added these two together, I get an answer of 6. And then when I do 2.5 plus 4, I get an answer of 6.5, both of which are reasonable answers. I just chose to round them a little bit differently. Okay. Alrighty. So you are going to estimate each sum or difference for the following problem. You are going to be 12 through 20 even, 21 through 23, 25 through 26. All of these problems focus on estimation skills with estimating addition of mixed numbers.